Good morning, everyone, and it's a glorious Tuesday morning, blue skies again, and I've decided it's partly outside. It's not quite outside. It's chilly this morning, but apart from that, timing doesn't allow me to get too far away. But I am here in my summer house at the end of my garden, and behind me you will see some of the photographs that we took when we were visiting Malawi a few years ago now, but I have those pictures here to remind me always of the time that we had and the fun that we had, so that any gaps in my memory can be triggered. Gaps, I think, is probably where I'm going today. Gaps because I was first thinking about transport in my younger days of going to school and such like. Of course, we walked most of the time, but then when moved to school, it was slightly further away in secondary, so I got the bus. Also, the school bag was slightly heavier, to be fair, with all these books that we had to carry for all these subjects. Wow, maybe internet's not so bad after all, makes it lighter on the arms. But the buses that we used to get in Edinburgh, the double-deckers, wonderful buses that had the conductress, of course, who would always make sure that you paid your fare, but also the buses that had that open back. You got on at the back of the bus, and there were no doors to keep you on or keep you off. And so as buses slowed down, you were able to jump on them or off them indeed. There were a few accidents, I have to say. It wasn't the safest thing in the world to do, but it was just good fun. And you learnt, in the middle of Edinburgh, you learnt a lot about traffic, how to dodge through it and cross roads that really probably shouldn't have been at the time, to gauge speeds and such like. And you knew that if you were jumping off the bus where you weren't meant to jump off the bus, you had to be able to run at a fair speed to keep your weight going forward, so that you didn't just keel over. So yeah, it was thinking about all the transport and the fun that we had on our transport too. But also the wordings and the warnings that come, like, do not jump off this bus while it's going round a corner, that sort of thing. But at railway stations, those wonderful words, which I think we still hear: mind the gap, mind the gap. Now, gaps, you see, these can be really good, or they can be really bad. They can be really quite good fun if you're jumping across a gap and you're testing yourself and you're enjoying out in the countryside, and you've got to leap a burn or a river or a flowing, raging torrent or whatever. It can be fun, these gaps, to try and traverse. But there are other gaps that are not so fun. And perhaps gaps in memory. We need things to remind us what we did, where we are, what we're doing. Gaps can be problematic. I'm going to show you another gap here just now, though, if I can turn this camera around. Because through that gap in between the houses, you may just be able to see what I showed you on my last reflection, hopefully, was the bridges. We can see things through gaps. We can catch glimpses of things that perhaps we haven't seen before, and it's only when we stop and look a bit beyond what we can see immediately that we see what is through the gaps or beyond the gaps. Sometimes it's better just to get the full vista of a glorious view across the Forth to Edinburgh, in my hometown city, whatever. Gaps, but there are other gaps, of course, and it's the other gaps that really caught my attention when I was thinking about that phrase, mind the gap. There are gaps around us all the time, and one of the gaps that perhaps we only remember about or look into when we either have visitors coming or there's something needing done in the house are the gaps perhaps between, let's think, a wall unit in a wall or a chest of drawers in the wall at the back, because sometimes things get caught in gaps. Sometimes we find treasures that we thought we'd lost. Or maybe just a Christmas card that's fallen off the back of the wall unit and hasn't been seen for years. And maybe it's just from somebody that you want to think about, need to think about. Maybe it's just a reminder that you haven't dusted for a while. But the gaps that we have in our homes that perhaps hold treasures for us. But there are other gaps too. And the other gaps that perhaps many of us are thinking about just now are the horrific gaps that people can fall through, find themselves in, get stuck in our society. The gaps that are bad at the moment and are only going to get worse, of poverty. Food poverty, home poverty, house poverty, money poverty. The gaps between the rich and the poor just don't seem to be getting any narrower. In fact, possibly the opposite. I don't know much about economics, and I know that other people do know a lot more than I do about how things work. But it seems over the decades of my life, so many ways have been tried to presumably narrow that gap. And perhaps sometimes we've seen it work for a while, but then it just seems to get bigger again. And if you're on the wrong side of that gap, then it's not just inconvenient. It's dangerous to life, to hope, to mindset, to emotions. It's a dangerous place when you're either in that gap or on the wrong side of that gap. So possibly for today, enjoying the countryside around us and where we live, and looking through the gaps and seeing what we can see beyond, but maybe also looking beyond our own lives. And for me, I'm talking about me, it's a privileged life, looking beyond that to try and see who is beyond that, who is out there, who is struggling, that I may be able to help. Might not, but I might be. I might be able to help simply by noticing them, simply by seeing them. There's a parable that Jesus told about a rich man and a man who sat at his gateway who had nothing. And the rich man never noticed, didn't notice he was sitting there, too taken up with his own life and what he was doing, and maybe his own importance in using his wealth. When they both died, the man who sat at the gate, who was given a name, who was called Lazarus, was welcomed into God's presence and given all that he had not had in this world. Whereas the rich man, in this parable, in this story, who was never named, didn't have quite such a good ending. But it's not about our ending. It's not about where we end up in the life beyond. It's about what we can do to help the people in this life. So, mind the gap. Mind that we don't make the gap. Mind that we don't make it worse. And mind the gap. Look at the gap. Remember there is a gap. Consider that gap and what we might be able to do to help. Today, Ken's going to be taking up a whole lot of kitchen stuff, foodstuffs to Frontline Fife that we gathered at our harvest. He's got a large car, thankfully. We can do that, and we can give the money, as we did on Sunday, to Rosyth Eats and to Dunfermline Food Bank. And every day we can do something to bring someone back from that gap, perhaps. Those cards, letters, the socks that fall down the back of drawers, all those things that spend so long in darkness, unseen, unnoticed. Sadly, there are people who live their life like that, who seem to have fallen out the back, down the side, and are left unnoticed. So today's a time to notice, and it's a glorious day to notice, a glorious day to look through the gaps and see what is there, to look and discover what we can enjoy for ourselves, what we can help other people enjoy, and how we can make the most of all that we have, where we are, as we are, with what we are privileged to have in life. And no matter how little we have, we can always give somebody one of our smiles, because we have, or should have, plenty of those to share around. So if we can, not just mind the gap, but really do mind them. Mind that they're there. Enjoy your day. And if you have a wee gap in the next half hour or hour or so, nip along to church, where there's coffee and cake and biscuits and company and people to chat with. Come and join us there if you're able. Meantime, enjoy this glorious day. God bless.